Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Tom Wheaton. Tom grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and he decided to enlist in the U.S. Navy for many reasons, the most notable being that his grandfathers and dads served during World War II and the Vietnam War, respectively. Wheaton began serving in the Navy in 1986 and is an original crew member of the USS Fort McHenry. In 1988, while on active duty in Perth, Australia, he sustained a spinal cord injury. After his initial treatment at the Royal Perth Rehabilitation Hospital, he was transferred to the Milwaukee VA Spinal Cord Injury Center. In 1989, Wheaton became a member of the North Central Chapter of the Paralyzed Veterans of America in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In 1993, he became a member of the new Minnesota Chapter of PVA, where he was the chapter's first director of sports and recreation and also served as chapter treasurer. After moving to Golden, Colorado, Wheaton served on a regional basis as sports director, treasurer, hospital liaison, and executive director of the Mountain States chapter of PVA. He also served as first vice president of the United Veterans Committee of Colorado. For the last 24 years, Wheaton has served on PVA's executive committee in various capacities, including as the organization's senior vice president and parliamentarian. Serving alongside many dedicated leaders on the executive committee has had a profound effect on his life. Wheaton says, "Journeying together to determine how we can best assist in enhancing the lives of our nation's heroes has been extremely rewarding." Wheaton was reelected National Treasurer of PVA in May of 2022 during the organization's 76th annual convention to begin a new one-year term on July 1st, 2022. He wants people to know that this is a significant time for us to continue to push forward and prove just how unstoppable we are. In addition to his responsibilities at PVA, Wheaton has served on various national veterans and disability advisory committees, including the National Spinal Cord Injury Association. Whenever he has spare time, Wheaton enjoys doing puzzles because they are a metaphor for facing life's challenges and overcoming them. Within his community, he is an elder of Hillside Community Church and co-leads its children's ministries with his wife, Angela. The Wheatons have been married for 21 years and are proud parents of 2 school-aged children. All right. Well, hi, Tom. Thanks so much for being our guest today. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Emily.
So why don't you start by telling listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Tom Wheaton. I've been paraplegic for 35 years, 57 years old now. When I was in the U.S. Navy, serving in the port just outside of Australia, I was actually struck by a car as a pedestrian and became paralyzed at the C6-7 level and adjusting and living life to the fullest as best I can since those times. That was in 1988. And so I live here in Colorado. I have a wonderful wife and 2 almost completely grown children. We have a almost 21-year-old son and a 17-year-old girl. Loving life here in the Rockies.
That's awesome. And tell us a little bit about kind of the work that you're involved in. Love to know about, any particular achievements or work that you're most passionate about or most proud of.
I really have enjoyed wheelchair sports when I was trying to get reacclimated in life. And so sports like sled hockey, wheelchair softball, downhill skiing, certainly in the Breckenridge area. Absolutely loved all those ways to get out and about and have those adaptive equipment make me feel a little more able-bodied and love the camaraderie with others. But eventually I got involved with the Paralyzed Veterans of America to get involved with not only wheelchair sports, but advocacy programs, volunteering, VA healthcare, fundraising. It's been a real joy to have that be a huge part of my life for the last few decades. And aside from that, I've really enjoyed a most recent effort of being part of a subcommittee for a task force with the state of Colorado. Myself and my peers had to get approved by the Governor Polis to be a part of this effort. And I'm part of a subcommittee that specifically wants to rewrite the ADA portions of the, I don't know if it's the Constitution or what, but something is happening big where we're able to have an opportunity to present to these lawmakers ways to make language clearer and more enforceable for those in the disability community.
Wow, that sounds like really interesting work. And obviously, I think it's great that you have that lived experience to kind of influence your positions on some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have another person who has disability, but we have some litigants. We have people who on that committee who represent the business community, and we're really trying to get all of our heads together to create language that makes sense for the future. And what's interesting in our proceedings recently is that we are very diverse in our perspectives. And so I'm always someone who tries to come to consensus. Sometimes that might not be available for some of the things we're trying to do. But nonetheless, pretty exciting work, and really glad to have that opportunity to be a voice for so many who really need that here in Colorado.
You said you sustained your injury in 1988, which of course was just a couple of years before the ADA was actually passed and made law. So I'd love to know a little bit more about when you first learned about the ADA and kind of maybe how you've seen it change over the years. Let's just start there.
Before ADA, I remember going to sporting events and not being able to see action, and that was a bummer. But also, I remember being in a movie theater where it was just a gradual slope and no flat seating, so I would have to kind of angle my wheelchair because I didn't have good brakes to make sure I didn't wheel down the whole aisle. And then after the ADA, it's been great to primarily for me to see curb cuts almost everywhere. That's probably the big thing they've done well on. But now we're talking over 33 years since that law has passed. And unfortunately, there is still a lot of pitfalls, a lot of things that aren't being enforced. I think of restaurants that have steps going up only. And I always wonder, is it really the business owners, that kind of fell short on thinking for everybody, or was it the approving authority? Like, perhaps inspectors that signed off to say this new business is good to go. So those are some of the things that I've been confronted with and have been really disappointed with. Or there might be, here in Colorado, we have a lot of snowfall. Sometimes that melts into ice and it might look like it's only 4 or 6 inches, but that keeps people like myself in manual wheelchairs from getting about safely. Or mommies with strollers, or maybe the elderly with the four-legged walker. We really have a lot of things that just have fallen short lately. Those are the things that have been a disappointment that really have not fulfilled really the spirit of that law that happened so many decades ago. And we still continue to fight for it and make sure that the access is not only physical, but as we know with people who are sight impaired, or when it comes to website stuff, there's just a lot of pitfalls everywhere where we still have a lot of work to do this many years later.
Yeah, definitely. There's still work to do, but it's interesting to hear some of the things that you felt like were noticeable changes, since kind of the ADA was passed and just picking up on those things that you mentioned, like the movie theater changes and things like that. So I always find that type of thing interesting. So, one of the things I wondered about you is kind of, we know that people who acquire disabilities and the kind of the way that you did with an injury or an illness, sometimes that can be a really significant identity shift. And especially for someone like you who, was serving in the Navy and probably had kind of your identity wrapped around into, being a part of that system. And so I just kind of wondered, what was that like for you to have to adjust to living with a disability, and maybe what were some of the things that helped you? I know you mentioned some adaptive sports and things like that. So I just wonder if you can expand on that.
At first, I'm thinking of how I first came to know that I was paralyzed from the neck down, for starters, and having an argument with the nurse in Australia and say, "No, I have to get back to my ship. They're counting on me." And she said, "You're not going anywhere." And of course, she won that argument, where I had to really face the facts of, okay, what does this new life look like? How can I actually do it with a good attitude and dignity, but also not to be kind of a pushover, if you will. There's a lot of things that need to happen to make sure we just kind of advocate in a very diplomatic but effective way. And I can tell you that for me, I learned so much from my peers, for people with different disabilities all over the country, really enjoying what their perspectives are. And it seems like when we try to make change versus, through law or through advocacy, it just seems like we're always striving to change attitudes, our own attitudes, as those who are in the disability community, but also those who of everyone else, people who will park in a handicap spot or in the aisle that a lift might need. And so it's all about attitude, and we try to do it in many ways, whether it's changing law, or going to for lawsuits, or to simply make the effort to get to an approving authority and say, hey, can we just sit down and talk about this diplomatically? I have found all those ways to be pretty effective. But every once in a while, it gets frustrating when there's a lack of accommodation, and it seems like there's two categories. There's kind of a willful, or maybe kind of a blasé neglect. So there's some that are just not in the know and feel bad that they aren't, and
Hmm.
others like, well, I don't really care about what your situation is. I don't want to deal with it. And so those are the tougher challenges where we have to, kind of regroup our efforts and figure out the best way to handle things.
Yeah, so you mentioned some of the challenges that kind of you continue to experience or see happening to others. Kind of on the flip side of that, what are some positive experiences that you've had, or, anything that stands out as a shining example of good compliance and good inclusivity? We always like to make sure people who are doing well and doing the right thing are getting acknowledged as well.
I was invited by a city council member about 4 or 5 years ago to share with the committee about something that I felt was not accessible here in the city of Golden, downtown. And it was one of those situations where you wheel or you walk, and all of a sudden you get to the end of the street and there's 5 steps. No
Mm.
signage, no, way to get around, you just had to turn around and go all the way back, and I thought, "Wow, that just seems so wrong for not only someone like myself who's a resident, but for all the visitors." It's just a real kinda slap in the face, and, when I shared, my story and the experience, they said, "Wow, you're absolutely right," and they rectified that, as quickly as they could during COVID, and I'm just so proud to know that when things like that happen, with a little sugar versus spice, it was great to see such a positive reaction on that. Also, with the trails here in Colorado, we were able to, change some signage so people knew there was an accessible route versus the more challenging uphill route. So things like that have been really nice to see. Wow, if we're able to make the effort to talk to these authorities, more often than not, they're able to find a solution, and a timely one, and one that doesn't need to be, changed again. So I've been grateful for those efforts recently.
I'd love to learn a little bit more about what the Paralyzed Veteran Administration does and, what you think the veteran community needs in terms of disability rights or just maybe just awareness.
Well, the Paralyzed Veterans of America is a pretty unique outfit. We have about 15,000 members around the country. Those who served in the military who got paralyzed either through an injury like myself or diseases like multiple sclerosis or ALS. And we as an organization advocate for them to make sure they have those opportunities of volunteering, making sure that the VA healthcare is available to them and has quality. And so we kind of keep the VA to their own standards, to their own rules. And what's been nice about that is we've been able to go to every VA hospital and go to the spinal cord injury centers and to give them an honest evaluation of what's going on there. We're highly respected in Congress. We employ a number of professional and expertise, advocates who not only work on veterans' claims for the benefits, but also make sure that the healthcare is available to them. And so when we're working with Congress or the administration, there's a clout that's developed over the years since we were founded in 1946. So every decade, we seem to have more and more clout, even though we have a lot less members than, say, American Legion, VFW, where they have millions of members. We have a small amount, but as we know, the price of admission is not pretty. Most of our members, have some horrific disabilities, some high quadriplegia, some secondary issues that result from that. And so, our opportunities is to give them dignity and to make sure that they have an encouragement and can be kind of heartened versus, feeling depressed, isolated, or have anxiety. So we make sure we get our members out and about.
Yeah, so sounds like a good sense of community and belonging that you're working on developing there.
Absolutely. And we've got 33 offices around the country we call chapters. And they have their own board of directors and their own professionals. And as we mentioned before, this podcast, the region here pretty much mirrors the ADA Rocky Mountain Center
Mhm.
with various states that we serve members in. But for me, the camaraderie has always been wheelchair sports, that's how I got back in life. Besides that, and getting back to education, and for me to have an organization like PVA in my life has been very life giving, very fulfilling, and you get to interact with others. You see that there's really no pity, and you're able to see, okay, some people might have a disability that's a little more horrific than mine, and I can be a little more empathetic, or I can appreciate just how active they are in life, and maybe I can do likewise. We have so many recreational opportunities, given the weather and, being able to ski, and it just seems like there's almost no excuse not to get out and about and really live life to its fullest.
And do you think there's anything in particular, specific to the veteran community that is a challenge when it comes to, teaching people about their disability rights or, getting involved in the disability community? Is there anything from your perspective specific to veterans that becomes a barrier that it might be good to think about or work on overcoming?
That's a challenging question. I don't know that I have an answer for that, except that when we're able to get together, so in other words, when I'm at the VA hospital for an appointment, and I happen to run into somebody else who's one of our members or in kind of the same situation, we have wonderful camaraderie that goes on with those kind of conversations about where did you serve, when did you serve, and so those things kind of come along in a unique way. But I can tell you, when I was involved with wheelchair sports, whether they were veterans or those who may have gotten hurt elsewhere as civilians, we learned so much more about how to live life than maybe the sport or activity that we're involved in. So
Mhm.
I find like the more opportunity, more things like that happen, the better off our perspectives are. But as far as veterans having additional barriers, I would only say that I don't think that there's as much of a negative connotation as there used to be with maybe Vietnam veterans coming back from an
Mhm.
ungrateful nation, if you will. It does seem like people are very respectful of us and our, choice to serve our country. That's what I've seen for the most part, but others might have a different perspective.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. So, one of the questions I love to ask all of our guests is just kind of from your perspective, from your wisdom that you've accumulated over time, what would you say to listeners who are feeling defeated right now, either because of a personal struggle or maybe current events or something else?
The willingness to kind of get out and about and to interact with others. And if that's not as available because of the physical disabilities, certainly, we have the technology that is something that we didn't have before to really feel encouraged and to learn from others and just to have fun, whether that's competition or interaction. I would just encourage people to not shy away from that, because once we get isolated, then, no, again, those thoughts of depression, in other scary areas, we don't want to go there.
Right.
Also for me, and I hope for other listeners, that there's a faith that develops. And if you have established that, I hope that will be strong in your life. That has been obviously a strong point for me, not only involvement with PVA and wheelchair sports, but the faith has really driven me to be able to feel encouraged in spite of any difficulties that come our way.
I love that. So, after today's episode, if listeners want to get a hold of you or, just get in touch, learn more, what would be the best way for them to connect?
Well, I'd love for them to have my email address.
Mhm.
Since I'm one of the national officers at the Paralyzed Veterans of America, that's a great way to get a hold of me. That's T Wheaton, which is Wheaton. So T Wheaton at PVA.org. And that would be a great way to connect.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes too for anybody who wants to follow up.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with listeners or anything that we didn't ask that we should have today?
I'm drawing a blank right now, but again, it's just that opportunity to be encouraged in life, and to know that we have resources, people who are really fighting for us. To me, it's an ongoing movement. Even if they come up with a cure for paralysis or all disabilities tomorrow, there's still so many attitudinal efforts that are needed. And I'm grateful for ADA centers, Paralyzed Veterans of America, so many other groups out there that work as coalitions just to make sure this voice and movement still gains steam and that we're able to have a voice, because unfortunately there is neglect, and we want to make sure that we're able to connect the dots and make sure there's improvement, progress, and encouragement, as we move forward in our lives.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You too. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucinia is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, grant number 90DPAD0014. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.